honor that you have chosen to spend your time with us. We're going to have, I hope, so much fun together. We're going to be giving away books the entire time. For me, that's really fun. I love winning books, and I love giving away books as well. My name is Daniel Gilman, and I'm your host today. You're going to spend most of the next hour, not with me, but with our guest speakers I'm thrilled for you to meet and get to interact with soon. Today's webinar and all the future webinars for the Center for Public Speaking is designed for one purpose: to help you make a beautiful difference in the world through strengthening your public speaking and communications. I say your, but I mean my as well. I'm going to be taking notes and learning right alongside you. We're going to be doing monthly webinars on this subject of the art of public speaking, exploring various facets. The Center for Public Speaking is a public speaking coaching firm. We have 8 coaches around the world in every hemisphere. We're there, we're coaching both in person and online. If anyone is interested, we would love to work with you as well. We've coached 32 individuals one-on-one since April of this year in 12 different countries. Speaking of different countries, I know we have people tuning in from all around the world right now. So why not in the chat box, let me know, let us all know what city and country you're tuning in from. Be sure to make sure that you're in the chat box, you select panelists and attendees. Otherwise, just the panelists get to see your chat. Not only is there a chat box, there's also a Q&A box. We would love to receive your questions for the speakers, as they're each going to speak for a little bit, and then the rest of the hour will be there. Will be conversation with your questions. Let's give a book away right now. We're going to give a book that has been incredibly helpful to me in my speaking and coaching about speaking. It's Chris Anderson's TED Talks, the official guide to public speaking. Chris Anderson is the CEO of the TED company, and it is such a helpful book. The winner is Vojta Kubis, tuning in from the Czech Republic. Vojta, this book is going to show up right at your door in the Czech Republic. We're so thrilled that you're going to get a copy of this book because it is such a helpful book. Well, today is all about specifically the differences between writing and public speaking. It was birthed in a conversation I had with a client earlier this year. The client said, Daniel, I want you to coach me on my delivery, not my content, not the script of my speech, because I'm a published author. I'm confident in my writing. My actual scripts for my speeches are strong. It's the delivery I need help with. I got to ask follow-up questions and probe further with this client, as together we unpack the fact that there's actually a profound difference between the words you'll write for a book chapter, an article, or a blog, and the crafting of your speech. So to help us with that are 2 world-class authors and speakers. In my opinion, there's not a lot of people around the world who are excellent at both, and these 2 women are. They're both inspiring speakers who can hold an audience's attention, make time stand still, and go by so fast as they inspire and make a difference in their lives as speakers. And their books have changed the lives of many people, including myself. So I'm going to introduce the first speaker. She'll speak for 12 minutes. I'll introduce the next speaker. She'll speak for 12 minutes. The rest of the time will be conversation. The first speaker is someone who has written more than 40 books. She's been translated into 5 languages. She is not only a published author and global speaker, she's also a literary agent, and she's become a dear friend. Last year, a number of us who've tuned in today were rocked by a global scandal, a situation where a faith leader we so respected, in this case was my boss, he had changed my life, turned out to be a global predator. And so when the news first hit in early October, late September, I turned the first place I turned for some clarity was this book, Mary DeMuth's We Too. I never thought I would have a chance to meet her or to get to do a webinar with her, but we have that opportunity right now. Not only now, but even back then, she made time to get on a Zoom call with a random stranger, myself, and just spent time with me and my wife in our pain. We were also going through some really dark personal stuff at the time. We'd actually tragically just had our second miscarriage that year. And so Mary just entered right into our pain. Here she is, this published author and speaker, and just made time to be with us in our pain and provide some clarity. She's a woman that inspires me through her speaking and her writing and her presence. And so it's a thrill that at the launch of our webinar, she would be present once again, speaking to us on the differences to keep in mind between writing and speaking. When just in 12 minutes from now, we'll give away a copy of her incredible book, We Too, how the church can respond redemptively to the sexual abuse crisis. Without any further ado, please give a warm digital welcome to Mary DeMuth.
Thank you so much. And yeah, that warm digital welcome. It's so hard when I'm not in front of an audience. In fact, recently I was able to be in front of an audience teaching at a writers' conference, and the joy that I experienced cannot be calculated. In fact, I got so excited. I made all of them get sort of COVIDly get together, and I took a picture of the audience because I was like, there's human beings that I see. So I'm sure that digitally you guys are awesome. I miss having an audience. I think that we're getting closer to being able to do that, but thank you so much for coming today. I wanted to talk a little bit about speaking and writing because I do both. And I'm an author of, in fact, yesterday, I think I just finished a book. It was either 45 or 44. I need to double check on that number. But there's a great joy in completing a book. The problem is, I think the misunderstanding is that if you can write a book, then you can speak, or if you can speak, then you can easily write a book. But these are two different skill sets. They are not the same. And in fact, there have been times where I have picked up a book by a popular speaker or pastor, and I've read it and it sounds just like they're speaking. And that's not good. You want it to sound like, you don't want to necessarily hear their speaking voice in your head. You want to have it be written in a way that it has logic and doesn't make leaps of logic and all that. That's its own skill set. Now, as a literary agent now, I see a lot of writing, and I can tell when a speaker is trying to write a book because there's a lot of punchy little points, but there's not a lot of time to develop what they want to say. So in writing, you have time. You've got the space to really flesh out an idea. You can spend pages on it, of the development of a theme. The payoff for writing is years in the making. So I just finished a book, and it'll be at least a year and a half before I get any feedback on that book. However, in speaking, you have a short time to captivate that audience within a moment. But the payoff is immediately. And that's why I love speaking so much. Because I can craft a message that is punchy and effective and emotional and touches that audience. And I can immediately recalibrate and readjust when I see their faces. And I will get an immediate response at the end of that talk, where I get to interact with people right after that piece of communication. And so for writing, the payoff is longer and it takes longer, but you have the freedom to develop what you want to say. In speaking, it's shorter. It doesn't take as long. I would say it does take long to craft a great message, but your impact and the captivation of an audience is immediate. So that's kind of the difference that I see between the two different platforms. So what I think makes a good speaker may be different than others, but personally, this is when I'm captivated by a good speaker. The first thing is that they are relatable. Your audience is not going to care about you until they sense that you understand where they're coming from. And I've been to plenty of speeches where people are using it basically as a business card, and they're just saying, here, this is all the cool things that I can do for you. Or it's very me monster centric. It's all about me and that and all my great ideas. But a great speaker is relatable. They know their audience and they know how to bless their audience. They understand the felt needs of their audience, and they're not at all about themselves. They can show that they have expertise, absolutely, but that expertise is to serve the audience, not to give us a badge. Your job is to put a badge on the audience, to elevate them, to help them to become a part of the story that you're telling. A good speaker is also empathetic. Good communication is about identifying that felt need in your audience's lives and then demonstrating that you understand their pain point. And this will kind of boil into the next point that I'm going to make. But empathetic speakers understand that we are all humans And we all have issues. We all have broken parts. And if you can speak into that place, you are going to win your audience. When I go to a talk that's unrelatable and I feel like the speaker doesn't really care about what I'm going through, I can tend to tune out. The next thing that segues into that is a good speaker is a storyteller. People will remember your stories far more than they remember your oration. You're not also to perform your story, but to tell it. I have, and maybe this is just me, but I don't like a performed story. I don't like it when someone has worked on a speech so much that you feel like they could deliver it in their sleep, and they are simply performing something rather than interacting with it alongside the audience. A good speaker is clear and simple. My best talk that I give, or maybe one that I'm known most for, is about healing from trauma. It had 3 points. It was very simple. The first point was, when you have had pain from the past, you have to be gutsy. So just 2 words, be gutsy. And what I say in that is, I tell people an untold story never heals. In order to heal, you have to let your story out, and that takes guts. Second point, to be tribal. And what I teach there is that in order to heal from negative community, you have to walk into positive community. What wounds you, which is negative community, is also what heals you, positive community. So be tribal, be part of a community. That's where you will find your healing. You do not heal in a vacuum. Number 3 point, be a hero. Become, after you've gone through all that trauma healing, become what you needed when you were traumatized. Become a hero. And so again, you can just see the simplicity of it. Be gutsy, be tribal, be a hero. I have learned to simplify my talks in such a way that they have those kinds of punchy points, so that I could give that talk just like I did in 2 minutes. I could also give that talk in 45 minutes. So having that simplistic, clear and simple takeaway will really help. It will cause people to remember your talk. A good speaker is also authentic. I had the opportunity to be kind of behind the scenes of a certain very well-known, highly paid speaker. And she was talking to us kind of about her trade secrets. And she said something like, well, at minute 14, I will tell a story and I will cry. At minute 18, I will have them laugh with a joke. At minute 24, I will do this. And I thought, that can't be true. But I took notes and I thought, I'm never going to do that, because that's not who I am. And I'm not going to prescribe when I'm going to cry, because I can't. I'm not that good of an actress. Anyway, so a few months later, I went to one of that teacher's talks. And sure enough, at minute 14, she made everybody cry. At minute 18, minute 21, whatever it was, she followed her formula to a T, and it just made me mad. I felt like I had been emotionally manipulated, and I did not feel like she was being herself. I felt like she was performing a speech. There is a great deal of difference between performing something and delivering a message that's going to change the world. So if you do have emotion, follow it, allow it, of course, but to prescribe it can come across as inauthentic. And then a good speaker uses great rhetorical devices like mnemonics, alliteration, repetition, and metaphors. Having good metaphors and good stories will cause your audience to remember something more. For instance, when I talk about how important it is to be tribal in that talk about being abused or kind of working through past trauma, I say the phrase, what wounds you is what heals you. And then I talk about this moment where we left France as missionaries, and we had kind of made a vow that we were never going to trust Christians again, particularly not Christian leaders. We flew home to Dallas, and it was Christmas time. And at that time, we didn't even think that our family was going to have Christmas. We were going to live in the corner of a barn. My name is Mary, so that was kind of interesting, living in a corner of a barn right around Christmas. And we heard the cattle lowing. We drive into this place, and our friends had decorated that little corner of the barn. It was a little apartment. They had put up a Christmas tree, and they had Christmas music playing, and there were presents under the tree. There was food in the pantry. The beds were made. And I felt that in that moment, I felt I had that choice. Was I going to walk into the community that would heal me, or was I going to push it away? And it was fits and starts. But what I learned was that good community healed me from past bad community. So that was a story that illustrated a point, and people will remember that. Having that kind of metaphor or story gives people something to hang their hat on. All right. And then some ways of how to improve is to take notes when you watch another speaker. So I'm constantly taking notes when it comes to seeing speakers. And it may not even be like, I wrote it down, but I just tell myself, hey, remember what they did there. So become a constant student of great speakers. And then watch yourself on tape if you dare. I hate doing this. I do not like it. I pick myself apart, all those things, but it does help you to improve. Do your talk a lot until it becomes sheer joy. This is different than performing your talk. It's becoming so comfortable with it that if Daniel said to you, okay, in 5 minutes, I need you to talk about this, you could do it and you wouldn't be afraid. So that kind of practice that gives confidence. And then seek feedback from your audience. In the initial parts of my speaking career, I would give out a survey at the end and just kind of query them on what hit them, what didn't, what could have been improved. Super helpful feedback. And then just, of course, just the idea of practicing until it just becomes second nature to you, which I just talked about. So practice and then also practice. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give you some ideas about all those years that I've been speaking, of what makes a good speaker, how you can improve, and the importance of moving that audience to knowing that audience so well that you know their felt needs and you can meet them with something practical that they can take away and walk away from. So there you go. Those are my 12 minutes, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Jessica next.
Hey, Mary, thank you so much. I see some questions coming in the chat box. It'll be most helpful for me if people would put their questions in the Q&A box. It's a different box. Also, we're going to give away this book right here, We Too by Mary DeMuth. I love this book. It's provided such clarity and hope for me, and I want you to have that too. So we are going to give this book away to Jeanette. Jeanette, you just won this book. It'll show up at your house. Please message us privately your details so that whatever country you're in, it'll show up at your door. The next speaker is another speaker that just both her content and also her craft of speaking amazes me. I first discovered her when a team of us from Ottawa were down in somewhere in the States. It was a huge conference. There's like 1,000 of us, all of us either speakers, coaches, or therapists. Pretty much everyone was an expert on combating sexual exploitation, helping people find freedom from porn. We're all speakers. Who speaks to the speakers? There's a ton of them. These are like the best of the best speaking to us, like TED Talks, all throughout the day, every day for a week. It was a feast of great speaking. But there's only maybe three names I remember from that week. And one of them is Jessica. From the moment she stepped on the stage and began speaking to us, my whole team from Ottawa were spellbound. Actually, I was hoping to show it to you. I'm not going to waste your time, but there's a photo I have where I went up to her booth after. I stood in line for a long time, and I am fanboying so hard. I'm just like so excited to meet this incredible speaker. She's also an author. I don't have her book with me, but we're going to give it away right now. The reason I don't have it is my wife and I are always giving it to people, giving it away. We get new copies, give it. And it looks like we gave away our own copy of it. Usually we get fresh copies to give. So we're going to have to order ourselves our own copy, but we also want people to receive a copy as well. So we're going to give this book away to, scrolling through the list of attendees, Tanya, you just won Beggar's Daughter, which is Jessica's book. She has it right there. It's such a good book, and I know you will benefit from it. We're going to keep giving books away. Please welcome, speaking to us on the topic, the differences between speaking and writing, Jessica Harris.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I apologize in advance for my lovely little daughters who might be yelling in the background. I am a work-at-home mom, and even though we have a sitter, our babies aren't having it today. So if there are special guests, I apologize for you having to suffer through their cuteness. Thank you so much, Mary, for phenomenal just tips on how to deliver a message effectively when you're public speaking, and the importance of reaching your audience. And I think I want to spend a few minutes just talking about what the difference is between writing and public speaking. You can be a great writer. You can be a fantastic writer. You can write a blog post or an article, something that goes viral, that is referenced by experts. You can write something that makes somebody want to call you up and say, come and present to our people. If you take that piece of writing, show up at that event, and read that writing, you are going to be the most boring speaker those people have ever seen in their lives. I don't know how many of you have gone to lectures or college courses, but I always feel like it completely insults the intelligence of the audience to simply read something that you have written. Like Mary said, they're two completely different skills. And the important thing is to realize that they are, in fact, skills. Can someone be gifted in them? Yes, but there's still a skill. There's still something that we have to craft and have to learn. No one is born presenting on a stage. No one is born writing books. There are things that we learn. There are things that we learn how to do, and you might have a natural tendency to do one of them well. Your personality might lend towards being a dynamic public speaker or towards being a very effectual writer. But the importance is that you learn how to saddle and harness the advantages of each. And so I want to talk real quickly about the advantages of public speaking versus writing. And I boil it down to the 3 T's. So if you're a note taker, there you go. Your first T is tone. You cannot effectively communicate tone quickly in writing. You can much more effectively stand on a stage and through your body language, your facial expression, and your actual tone of voice, communicate tone effectively in one opening sentence. Whereas in a piece of writing, it could take you an entire paragraph trying to clearly communicate your idea, and still people aren't going to get it. So you're able to communicate tone very effectively in public speaking. That doesn't matter if you don't use your tone. If you stand up there and everything's monotone and you never move and you never change your face, you've lost that advantage that public speaking has. The second T is tempo. It is nigh unto impossible to communicate tempo in writing. And what do I mean? I am not talking about what Mary was referencing, this idea of timing where at 14 minutes you make someone cry and at 18 minutes you do this. That's like a movie script. That's not what we're talking about here. But the natural ebb and flow that we have in conversation and in dialogue, when you are talking to your friends or talking to your family, there is a natural speed change at which you communicate. So when you're more excited about something, you might talk super fast and you might really dredge up interest by, and then when you're maybe wanting someone to think about something, you slow it down because you want to give time to think and you want things to be calmer, and you control the tempo of that conversation. That is impossible in writing. You read, when we read at the speed that we speak. So I can read faster than you can speak, and we just read rhythmically. We have our own little reading voice inside of our head. We don't really speed up and slow down when we're reading, but when we're standing on a stage presenting, we're able to bring people into our story and bring people into what we're presenting through tone, but also through tempo and through changing the speed at which we're presenting things. It also helps to be able to move through something quicker. If we see, oh, maybe this isn't being as effective, we can move through something. Which brings me to the third T, and that's tenor. And I'm not talking about like the voice in the choir. I'm talking about the general atmosphere in the room. And obviously that's hard to do in the time of COVID when presentations are online. I can't see a single one of you right now. I'm talking to a computer. But normally on a public speaking stage, we're able to have a pulse on the room. And the importance in public speaking is to engage with your audience. And so if you look out at your audience and you see them, say, for instance, crying, you understand that what you're saying is making an impact, and you might know how to move carefully through what you're going to say next, or you might even start ditching certain things because maybe this audience is very tender to something and you're hitting nerves and it's not comfortable. Or if you're looking out and they're completely glazed over or checking their phones or talking to other people, you realize that you're losing them and you can adjust accordingly. And so these are all things, the tone, the tempo, and the tenor that are advantages in public speaking that you do not have in writing. In writing, to communicate tone, we use a lot of adjectives, we use supporting sentences. We can't really like bold in all caps. I mean, that's not very professional. Bold in all caps, and we might italicize, but it doesn't quite give the emphasis that we can do from a stage. For tempo, you can't really communicate the idea of tempo through writing other than through using very powerful verbs and adverbs. If I take those things from writing, all I needed to do for the tone and all I needed to do for tempo in writing, and I bring them to the stage, they're redundant. So if I'm talking about how excited I am, all I need to do is act excited. I don't have to explain how excited I am. And so it's important when you have a piece of writing, if you have a topic that you're very passionate about, you can keep your content. Just don't go up and read it verbatim. What you want to do is recraft it to take advantage of the strengths of public speaking. The strengths of public speaking and the strengths of writing are almost polar opposites of each other. What makes writing so powerful is what can make public speaking so weak. And so if you take your strong writing and you just try to read it, you're missing out on what makes public speaking such a powerful and effective medium. If you want to imagine it, some people, and like my grandpa was super resourceful. And so I can imagine my grandfather using, for instance, like a butter knife as a screwdriver. And I think sometimes when we're asked to present on things, we can fall into that. Okay, I've got this great piece of writing. I already wrote a blog post about that. I've already written a book on that. I'm just going to take that piece and I'm going to just use it for this. I'm going to take this butter knife and I'm going to use it as a screwdriver, but that's not what the butter knife is for. And it might work kind of sort of as a screwdriver, but a screwdriver is a better screwdriver than a butter knife is. And so what we're wanting to do is take that message, that written message, that butter knife, and melt it down, not just repurpose it, but we're wanting to melt it down, keeping all of the same components, but we're recrafting it and reshaping it so that it can be an effective screwdriver and that it can meet the needs of the audience and take advantage of the strengths of public speaking. That's really what you want to do when you are presenting something, especially something that you're passionate about. Allow that passion to come through in your presentation of that. And I feel like passion is so much easier to communicate through public speaking than it is through writing. And so take advantage of those strengths and know, someone mentioned this in the comments, and so I'm going to address it because it kind of fits. Like, what about all of these writing conferences that talk about finding your voice? Your writing voice and your speaking voice are two different things. The way that your voice comes through in writing and in speaking are not the same. Like Mary was saying, you shouldn't be able to sit down and read something and hear the other person speaking it. Like, it shouldn't sound the same. And so that's really important. So my takeaway, or my give to you to take away, is that if we want to communicate effectively, we have to take full advantage of the strengths of the medium that we're using while also accommodating its weaknesses. Public speaking does have its weaknesses. And so again, kind of with the strengths, how they're opposite the weaknesses in writing, the weaknesses of public speaking are actually what makes writing strong. The ability to go back and reread it, the ability to cite sources more easily, to pause. I can pause reading something and look up something. That allows us to use more complex ideas in writing. It allows us to use more material in writing and to share more complicated thoughts, because someone can read them back over, digest them. They can look up sources for it. We can make those attachments. But how many times have you been in a presentation where someone tries to do the whole complicated thought citing sources thing, and you can't stop them in mid-sentence and ask them to repeat what they just said? You're frantically trying to scribble down what they're saying because you need to look it up later. That's an illustration of how the differences are. So what makes writing strong, or strength of writing, is actually a weakness in public speaking. And so if we want to communicate effectively, we have to learn how to take full advantages of the strengths of public speaking while still accommodating those weaknesses, and understanding that those strengths and weaknesses are probably exactly the opposite of the strengths and weaknesses of writing and communicating our messages through writing. I'm not sure, I didn't time myself, so I don't know where we're at, but I'll invite Daniel and Mary to come back. And
well, thank you so much, Jessica. It was both of you were filled your moments with us with so many practical tips, which is exactly what we want. A lot of good and excellent questions have come in. Just before we get into that, we're going to give away another book. This book is called Public Speaking, and it's by Thomas Jerome Baker. And the winner is Robin from International Justice Mission. Please, Robin, send us your mailing address and we'll send you the book. The first question comes from Patricia, and she asks, any advice for speakers when presenting new concepts that are fairly technical? Jessica, you were addressing this just a little bit there at the end about the advantage of writing, being able to explain technical stuff. But what do we do? Both of you, please chime in. How do you help people from a public speaking perspective when it's technical stuff to explain?
I would say probably one of the geniuses of a good speaker is being able to explain it to a 5-year-old. So taking something complicated and confusing and being able to simplify it to its very basic level, and then communicate it to a younger audience, maybe someone in your house, and say, do you understand what I'm talking about? Because you could really get stuck in the weeds if you haven't practiced it on someone that's maybe younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I would agree. So I used to teach high school math, right? And so I'm teaching like calculus and geometry and advanced math skills. And you'll have some people who obviously get it, but if you are presenting something technical, then you're less public speaking and you're more teaching at that point. And unless you're speaking to a room that already understands. So if you're at like a technical conference, like at a computer conference, it's all about knowing your audience and knowing that if you come at them talking like you're talking to a 5-year-old, they're going to be super insulted. So like it's about knowing your audience and being able to understand, okay, am I sharing this with other people who are at the same level, or am I teaching? Am I helping to educate somebody about this? So I experience this sometimes. I speak on women who struggle with pornography. So if I am dealing with a group of people who have no idea what I'm talking about, then I am going to rely more on educating them about that. And it is about kind of, I don't want to say dumbing it down, but like Mary said, like simplifying that message and like spelling it out for them, because we're assuming they don't understand, and not in an insulting way, but in a here, like I want to educate you way. That's different than if I'm in a room full of women who all struggle with pornography. The message is going to be completely different. It's going to be presented in a different way. They all understand all of that base level building up doesn't need to be there for them. Like I can meet them right where they're at and we can keep going from there. So I think it's about simplifying. So if you have something super technical that you're presenting to a non-technically inclined audience, I would recommend maybe a handout that maybe like a glossary that explains some of the more technical terms, or something that would help them to go look it up later if you had the option for a PowerPoint. But understand that like the more, I guess, technical your talk is, I feel like the less they're actually going to take away from it. So if you're able to kind of bring them up to speed quickly and then say whatever you want to say, make sure they have a take home point from what you're saying.
Thanks, Jessica. I want to highlight Jessica mentioned the fact that essentially when you are writing, you may be read by, you don't know who your audience will be. It might be a more diverse audience, but when you're speaking, you can actually go and do a lot of research on who's going to be in that room. What's the demographic? What's their level of education, or how engaged are they? And then you're able to tailor your specific talk to that specific audience. That's a really good point, Jessica and Mary. The next question comes from Kelly. It's a bit wordy, but it's a great question. Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to read it to you. Given that statistically, people retain only a fraction of information given during presentations, as opposed to having them involved, how does a public speaker engage in such a way that not only keeps interest, but allows the listener to retain the information long-term?
I think it's storytelling and emotional word pictures that are going to stick in the part of the brain that remembers stories, which seems to be a bigger part than the part of the brain that understands and remembers statistics. And so, if you can be memorable and say something that I mean, I just maybe, and again, maybe it's just my mind, but I just remember stories so much better. So if you can frame your content in a metaphor, or frame it in a story, or frame it in a simile, or frame it in a way that has teeth, then people will tend to retain it better than if it's just strict information.
Thank you. Jessica, did you want to chime in?
I think that's an expert way of putting it. I think it's just very important that you bring your audience along on the journey, whatever you're sharing, that you're not just regurgitating it at them. And that's another one of the writing versus speaking disadvantages. In writing, I can pelt you with all kinds of stuff because you can come back to it later. Do not you can't expect your audience to remember everything you say. And so, like Mary said, you're going to craft, you're going to use storytelling and poignant word pictures and metaphors to drive home those important points. But you have to know what you want your audience to remember. Going into it saying they're not going to remember everything I say, how can I make them remember what I want them to remember? And you're going to use the storytelling and the craft to be able to do that.
I think that also riffs off that idea of, instead of, I think in like Baptist circles, there's always has to be 3 points to something, right? But I go back to the book, The One Thing, by Gary Keller. And what is the one thing that if your audience changed their behavior in that one thing, that would change their lives forever? What is the one thing that you want them to leave the audience and walk out into the real world? If you could give them one thing, what would it be? And that helps to craft the message so that they will receive the one thing instead of the 7 things or the 12 things.
Absolutely. It's so good. Along similar lines, Mary, in your talk, there's a number of pieces of advice, like use metaphor. I think you may have said use a lot of stories, be relatable. Now, this is stuff that if one was speaking to writers about writing, would probably also be told them. And so a question for myself is, from your perspective, when you're saying this on the topic of the difference between writing and speaking, are you meaning to use those things in a different way, or is it just that it's excellent advice for both?
I think it's excellent advice for both, as one who writes and one who speaks, and one who reads a lot and one who listens to a lot of people speaking. All those things are helpful. Now, obviously, you have a different medium. So if you're writing a textbook about calculus and you're going to give it to Jessica to teach high school students, there's not going to be a lot of metaphor in there. And so it depends on the medium of what you're trying to create. But in my mind, I'm thinking, we are creative human beings, and I really appreciate when I read a textbook that has some humor in it, or something that helps me to wrap my mind around it. So yes, both of those things, all those things can be used in both methods. In writing, you just have a little bit more time to flesh out that metaphor or flesh out that story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Josh from Calgary has a question. He asks, and I know a lot of people are asking the same question: do you have a rule for balancing humor and intensity when delivering a persuasive speech? Jessica, do you want to take the first crack?
Yes. because the topic that I present on is rather intense, and because I can get a little bulldogish about it and a little like sink my teeth in, and especially if I'm sharing my story, it can kind of get a little heavy. That's where it becomes so important to read the room and to understand how the room is feeling. Sometimes you can feel the tension, and it's your job as the speaker to cut that and to know how to cut that. So don't go in, like Mary was saying, like, don't go in with like, here's the joke and here's the joke, and I'm going to put this joke here and this joke here. This is not a movie script. Like my husband hates watching movies with me because I'll be like, oh, well, here's the drama. Okay, wait for the comedic relief at the end. Wait for it. There it is. Like, well done, writers. You know? And he's like, can't you just enjoy the movie? Like, no, I have to analyze it. So when you're in a room and you're kind of feeling that maybe you're coming off a little too intense, or it's just not, it's getting a little heavy, that's when you start to infuse the humor. I would say, unless you're wanting to be a comedian, like you don't necessarily want to go in hoping to major more on the humor side of things. You want to go in with a serious point to make, not be the class clown, like, but it's still okay to have kind of an arsenal, I guess, of lighthearted jokes that you make. So I have one that I'll do. Sometimes I'll share my story. I have a certain part of my story that, depending on the audience, it will make them nervously laugh. So it's a way, and I wish I could remember it, but it's a way to kind of gauge what kind of audience I'm dealing with. So depending on who they are, I'll get like a nervous little chuckle. And if I get that, I grab it and I say, you're laughing because it's true. And then everyone just breaks out laughing, and it just, everyone takes a deep breath, and then we move on with the rest of the things. And I'll insert things like that throughout. But if I try that line in a room full of older people who aren't as amused, I'm not going to follow it up with, you're laughing because it's true, because they're not laughing. So I need to do something else to get them engaged. And so it's helpful to kind of have a toolkit of, I don't want to say icebreakers, but something that helps to bring that levity when you need it. You don't want to make fun of what you're talking about. You don't want to make light of serious topics, but humor does help to almost endear the audience to you. It helps them to want to pay attention to what you're saying.
And part of, just to piggyback, I agree 100% with everything you just said, is to be yourself. There's nothing worse than someone getting up and forcing a joke on an audience because someone told them they needed to tell a joke. So, and that was one thing that was surprising to me in my journey as a speaker. I had this one period of time in my writing where I hired a branding coach, and he had given me the moniker Turning Trials to Triumph, and it just never really fit me, and I didn't really like it, but I thought, he's the expert, I better do that. And then when I would publicly speak, people would come up to me and say, well, oh, I thought you were going to be really dour and not very much fun, and you're actually funny. And so it showed me that my personality, it can come out in my talk, and people like that because that's genuinely who I am. And if I'm going to say something funny, it usually comes from the spontaneous moment. But I think that's what Jessica's getting at it too, is reading your audience is probably the most important thing that you can do as a speaker, because you're going to say it different to a group of a different demographic, and you're going to do exactly what she did. You're going to test a little joke and see if it works, and then you're going to back off if it doesn't, or plow forward if it does.
Thank you. Thank you both. Robin has a question that it links into this so well. But before we get to that, I was going to announce this later, but it's just so relevant to Josh's question. The next webinar we're doing, which will be September 30th, is actually called, the webinar is Legitimately Funny. That's the name of the webinar, Legitimately Funny, how to use humor well without being mean. Just yesterday, one of my clients was saying how they were giving a speech and they got to their funny part, and it was just absolute awkward silence. And they were it threw them off the rest of the talk. They just felt dizzy and their throat closed in, and they were upset. And then moments later, when they were trying to make an actual serious point, everyone was laughing, and it just threw them again. So how to handle when people are laughing, when they're not laughing, how to handle humor well. The one of the two, I'll mention the second name, who I'm also really excited for, but one of the two speakers on that is Joel Turner. He literally wrote the book on humor in public speaking. It's a great book. He's actually from Calgary, as is Josh. Josh, you asked such a good question. We're going to mail this to you. This is your book now, not this copy, from Amazon Prime. You'll get a copy at your door. So send us your mailing address, humor me, how to add comedy to your brain, your life, and your message. He was a full-time stand-up comedian. Now he's a pastor and traveling itinerant speaker, and he'll be one of our guests next time. Anyways, enough of the plug. The Robin's question is relevant because, Jessica, you were talking about you tell a joke and you see how it lands, and then you can either say this is why you're laughing because it's true, or not. So much of audience live feedback is part of shining as a speaker, and it's something we don't have as a writer. But in today's world, we're increasingly doing digital events. So Robin asks, what advice would you give knowing, understanding, and building empathy with your audience when it's a virtual context like this?
Yeah, it's hard. And I think even like I'm just talking to a camera. And so for me, I have the advantage of years of public speaking. So I can, well, not in this context because I've never done this exact presentation before, but when I'm presenting my story, for instance, like to a youth group via live stream and I can't see them, I've presented to youth groups before. So I can kind of rely on what worked in person while also acknowledging the elephant in the room that we're not in the room, and being able to kind of connect with them by saying like, listen, hey, I know this is hard. And this is how I would do it with a youth group, because you talk more casual to a youth group, guys, I know this is rough. It's weird just seeing my big face on a screen in front of you, but here's what I want to tell you. I think so much of the message can still come through, but you've got to establish that connection first. It's a little bit like what Mary said when she was speaking, that you have just seconds, almost like the first few words out of your mouth, the way you walk onto a stage, the way you open when you're presenting in public speaking is what's going to draw that audience in. You might have amazing content on the other side of that, but if you don't capture them in those first few moments, then you kind of lose them. And so I know the content's good, and I know that the content impacts people because it has for years. My job then is to try to make that connection by honestly just acknowledging, and even, some people are like, well, don't apologize for things. And you're not apologizing. You're just saying like, hey, I know this is weird. This is rough. Like, it's weird for me too. I'm talking to a computer screen, but let's go. And then you move on. And it's that same idea of like endearing the audience to you. Like, oh, she's cool. Like, she gets it. She's not just, let me do my performance and then leave. Like, it's wishing I could be there, wishing I could interact, but I can't. So this is what we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. There's something about what Jessica's saying where it's kind of what some call like breaking the fourth wall, I think might be the term. But you know how in movies or theater, you're not supposed to look into the audience. A lot that's important in movies. But when you're speaking, you actually want any opportunity to break that wall, that people feel that you see them and that you're part of them. And so instead of just launching into your talk, being able to say, hey, I know this is weird. I wish I was actually with you, but instead I'm looking into video camera, like it just makes it lets them know that you understand, and it's almost as if you're actually looking right into their face in a way. Mary, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think not doing it alone is really important. So having an extra person with you, they may be off screen or they may be on screen, who is monitoring the chat. I have seen so many things like this where there's a chat and the speaker's trying to like halfway monitor the chat at the same time giving a presentation, and having kind of that banter back and forth between the host of the webinar saying, hey, Mary, there's a question here I think that you could answer from Jessica, and here's the question. Even, having that interaction there sideways so that all the pressure is not on you to try to connect with everybody. You can't, you have too many things going on. So having that host is really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Another just pro tip, if it's a Zoom meeting rather than a webinar like this, I often start by just saying, hey, no one needs to, but it is so much more meaningful for me to see your face. So please consider turning your video on. And when it's surprising how often that's effective, that all of a sudden, instead of speaking to a bunch of nameplates with the odd photo, instead it's actually faces, and you're able to read the Zoom room a little more. So that can be helpful as well. Here's a question I'm sure a number of people are asking. This is from Tanya. She says, how can a writer start to get speaking opportunities? And she's specifically asking about a church context.
Yeah. So as a literary agent, I'm constantly bothering my authors about building their platforms. Jessica is one of my authors, and so I'll be bothering her. Thankfully, she already had a very strong speaking platform. In fact, she and I are very similar. We were both speakers probably before we were writing. Am I right, Jessica? Because I was speaking before I was writing. So I'll tell a story. There was a time where I had an expert tell me that I needed to write a newsletter, a physical newsletter to every megachurch women's ministry leader, pastor in the United States and Canada, and physically send it. And I felt in my gut that this was not going to work, but I was being an obedient girl. And so I did it. And so what I did was I sent these newsletters. I got this many speaking engagements on that first run. It cost me thousands of dollars. But I thought, okay, he said, no, it's just because they need to have more of you doing that. So I did it a couple more times, this many speaking engagements. My speaking engagements in the meantime that had nothing to do with that send out was through my relationships. I must have gotten like 5 to 8 really strong speaking engagements based on my own relationships. And so my encouragement is to have relationships widely among church leaders and to let people know, hey, I am speaking now. Part of that too is paying your dues and being willing to speak for that ugly candle that they give you at the end, or that $5 Starbucks gift card that's pretty much useless, to pay your dues. And the more that you are in front of an audience, the more the people in the audience then will want you for their next event. I would say almost 100% of my speaking, maybe it's 95%, has come from people in the audience of when I'm speaking.
So true, which is one of the reasons it's so important to really prepare, because when you're given an opportunity to speak, that opportunity is going to be critical to whether or not you get more opportunities. Other things that will make hosts or other people who are hosting stuff and see you and ask you is to be as present as possible. My advice is to stay away from the green room if there is one. Be there, go beforehand and meet people, shake hands, ask them questions from the audience. Stacked chairs is really important in church contexts. And then also try to end before you have to end. Everybody enjoys a succinct speaker. So that is just another couple pro tips. Jessica, did you want to add anything here as well?
I think fantastic. One thing I thought of though when you were speaking, Daniel, is I'm such an introvert. I love the green room, but I actually hide in it because it's more because of the topic of my discussions, because sometimes bring out creepy people. But I do always try to make myself available to so if you're like me or like, please no stacking chairs. One of the events I did, I literally was standing in line for 3 hours talking to people, pastors one-on-one, that were at a pastor's conference, and it was 3 hours of me standing there. I actually almost passed out from being on my feet. I stood there through lunch, so I've gone both extremes of this. I've gone definitely in my early days, like went into a youth group or a church, like feeling like I was like God's gift to public speaking and that I had all the answers and that they were there to like serve me. Definitely not the attitude that you want to have anywhere, church context, anywhere. Like you are there, as Mary said, you're there to uplift the audience and to reach the audience and to impact the audience. You're not there. They didn't come to get talked at. Like they came to learn something or to be encouraged or whatever the purpose of your talk is. And so you have to come into it with that heart. And so you would approach getting speaking engagements with that same heart. If you come at it, Mary, I did the same thing. Like I read all of the expert blogs and it was like, you have to cold call churches and send them stuff. And so I made some like little flyer all about me and sent it to churches. and nothing. Like, they don't care. And now that my husband's a pastor, and now that we're doing stuff, it's like we get those and we're like, shred. We don't even open them. But but if you approach things like, hey, I am the expert and you need to have me on your stage, they're going to go take a hike. Like, we don't want you on our stage. So you really want to have the same heart all throughout your pursuit of public speaking. If that is to educate people, do that through your writing, do that through your one-on-one relationships, do that in smaller places, and just trust that it will grow. You're not going to get a platform in front of thousands of people right away, and you don't want it, honestly. Like, you'll get up there, and if you are brand new, you might mess up, and then you've got 1,000 people who know that you're a horrible speaker. Like, don't be afraid to start small. I spoke at youth groups. I spoke at MOPS events. I spoke at women's breakfasts that I only could get a love offering for, that I had to drive myself to in Canada. You know, I'm from the US, and so I actually drove to Canada. And then they were like, we didn't pay her to come here, so if you guys want to do a love offering to help cover the rental car and the gas, like, just be willing to give what you have. What you have, it should be a gift, and you are wanting to give it to people. And whenever we give things, we don't force it on people. And so present yourself. Like, when someone asks you what you do, you can say, I'm a writer and also a speaker. Like, be willing to identify yourself as that, or I'm a speaker and I also write, or I speak and write on these things. But don't push it. Don't be kicking down doors. Knocking on them's okay, but you don't need to go the full on karate chop on a door. So
there's so many good questions I want to ask coming from those who are tuning in today, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna just make this the last question. Okay, we're just rapid fire quick answer, and then we're gonna do one more. Okay, so the quick the one I want a real quick answer for is Christina from Ottawa asks, how important is it to memorize your speech?
Not important.
Okay, thank you.
Please do not memorize your speech.
Yeah, there's a big difference between memorizing and familiarizing.
Exactly.
And memorizing
Yes.
makes you robotic. Not being familiar will make you rambly, but yeah, that's quick. Okay. Here is the last question. This is something that's not going to happen in writing, only in a speaking context. Jessica, you mentioned that sometimes you can be on a big stage and you mess up. How do you respond if you find yourself like my client yesterday, who said he told a joke and just felt so awkward as it fell so flat? What do you do when you find yourself kind of flubbing? How do you gain control and and stop the spiral and be able to respond live and salvage the rest of the talk?
I don't know. I guess it depends on how the audience is responding. Like, if they're throwing tomatoes at you, then you need to respond to what just happened. But if it's just more like, well, that was awkward, then just keep going, because they're going to follow you. And so if you as the speaker try to deliver a line and it's like, oof, that did not work, then you get all in your head, and then you might try to like say something else that's funny, like to try to like make it up, and you're trying to fix it. And they just want you to keep going. Like, they just want you to, okay, that was weird, like move on to your next point, person. And so I think it's important to know that this is why you don't memorize your speech. You need to be able to adapt it on the fly. And so if you realize, oh, hey, that did not go over well, then any other time you're going to do something like that in a speech, probably a good time to call an audible and drop that. Like, get those out of there. Don't keep making the same mistake over and over and over again in front of the same audience, but definitely don't draw attention to it. Just you don't want that to be what they remember. You don't want that to be, well, he said this joke and it really wasn't funny, and then he tried to fix it and that just made it worse. Not what you want to do. Just keep going. When you pick up on whatever is making them interact, sit there a while. This is what tempo is so important for. Like, when you find a place where they're like, ooh, like we're engaging with this, sit there a minute, because then you're like overriding that bad joke. Like, they're going to forget that unless you keep making a big deal out of it. So my advice, if you mess up on stage, if you lose your place, if you get off on a rabbit trail, it happens. If you tell a joke and it falls flat, just keep going. Just go right back to your notes and just keep going through. The audience is not going to remember it half as much as you will. You'll remember because you know what it was supposed to sound like. They're not going to care.
Thank you, Mary.
And since this is part of my personality, I am self-deprecating. And so I acknowledge it in the moment. I just told you guys obviously didn't think that was funny. I'm so sorry. Let's keep going and just kind of keep it in my personality and just acknowledge and move on. But I do acknowledge it just because I feel like they're thinking it. So I want to like get them beyond that point of thinking. So if I just say, hey, gosh, that was an odd joke, or something came out that was offensive that I didn't mean it to be. And oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing. And just kind of quickly acknowledging it and then moving on. I think we're saying the same things. It just kind of depends on your personality on how you want to do that.
Well, I think for both, what you're getting at is one of the first things Mary said at the start of the hour, which was to be yourself and to develop your voice, know your voice, and let your voice shine. And for some of you, your voice, you are such a funny person. And for others of you, funny just seems so artificial. And really, you are the person who comes in with a profoundly moving story. Your voice shakes like Paul Washer's, and it's your vibe. Own it and run with it. Well, Mary and Jessica, thank you so much. You guys were my number one choice of anyone to have as our webinar launch. And thank you for both saying yes, for being present in our lives personally, and also being present in the audience's life by being here and helping us with practical know-how and pro tips on how to speak and write better. So thank you both so much, guys. I'm going to put in the chat right here, the next webinar is September 30th. If you register by the end of tomorrow for the next webinar, you'll be entered into a draw to win your own copy of this book on humor, just like Josh from Calgary won one. We would love for you to win it as well. We'd love for everyone to have these, but we're just a new business. Well, Mary and Jessica, thank you again. I'm just going to wrap up with a couple more announcements, but on behalf of the audience, I want to say thank you so much for your insights and for your excellence. Thank you. Again, I've just put in the chat for everybody, and it'll be in the YouTube link as well. The link you need to register, it takes 40 seconds. It's free, and it is the webinar on Legitimately Funny, how to use humor well without being mean. That'll be the next webinar, September 30th. I really hope you can be there. The Center for Public Speaking does one-on-one coaching. And so if anybody's looking for that, we'd be thrilled to coach you, to walk with you. We're offering free consultations as well. So if you're interested in that, I'll do a full hour with you, one of the coaches or myself. Our team includes apologists from around the world, members of a former member of parliament, a vocal coach, media director, just people to help you. There's a fire alarm going right now in my home. So this is goodbye.